Your grandfather's garage had a high shelf above the rusted tackle boxes, and on it sat a row of hand-carved wooden ducks with chipped bills and staring glass eyes. You walked past them 100 times. One of those ducks just sold for $1,250,000. That is not hypothetical. That is a realized auction price from April 2026. A hand-carved wood duck drake made sometime around 1910 by a man named Joseph Lincoln of Accord, Massachusetts. It sat in a private collection for over 40 years. Then the bidding started at Guyette and Deeter Spring Auction in Lombard, Illinois. And when the hammer fell, the number on the board was $1,250,000 for a duck carved out of wood to trick other ducks. Here's the full story of how a utilitarian hunting tool, something men bought for pocket change at the turn of the century, became one of the most valuable folk art categories on earth. And it is also a story about how thousands of these things are still out there, in attics, in barns, in the back of your own garage, collecting the same dust they have collected for 60 years. His name was Anthony Elmer Crowell, born in East Harwich, Massachusetts in 1862. He grew up on Cape Cod, surrounded by marshes and migratory flyways. He started carving ducks because he needed them to hunt. Then he kept carving because he was impossibly, almost unreasonably good at it. Crowell did not think of himself as an artist. He thought of himself as a craftsman. He carved 9 to 5, 6 days a week in a converted workshop behind his house. He painted by hand. He studied the way light hit the feathers on a real canvas back, the way a pintail held its head in the water, the exact slope of a black duck's back, and then he reproduced it on a block of wood so precisely that wealthy hunters from Boston started ordering from him directly. Around 1900, a top-grade Crowell decoy sold for $2. His cheapest utilitarian models went for 25 cents. Sometimes he traded the good ones for a bucket of quahogs. He gave some away as gifts. They were tools, stunning tools, but tools. Nobody collected them. Nobody called them art. They were thrown into the bottom of a skiff, left in the rain, repainted when the paint chipped. Most were destroyed. Here is why that matters. In September of 2007, a private sale brokered in Boston closed on 2 Crowell decoys, a preening pintail drake and a sleeping Canada goose. The price for each one, $1.13 million. That is not an auction estimate. That is what someone wrote a check for. The preening pintail had last sold at Christie's in 2003 for $801,500. Before that, in 1986, it sold for $319,000. Before that, it was probably sitting in a damp boathouse on the Cape, covered in mildew. The sleeping Canada goose had sold at Sotheby's in 2000 for $684,500. 7 years after that, $1.13 million in a private deal. Look at that curve. 319,000, 801,000, 1.13 million. What else in your house follows a curve like that? But Crowell was not the only name. And here is where the story gets wider and closer to you. Not every valuable decoy was carved by a Cape Cod master working alone in a barn. The biggest commercial operation was the Mason Decoy Factory in Detroit, Michigan. From 1896 to 1924, Mason produced decoys by the thousands, factory-made, mass-produced, shipped worldwide. An original Mason decoy sold for around $1 for standard grade. most of them are worth a few $100s today, but not all of them. In the year 2000, a Mason Premier Grade Wood Duck Drake, the highest grade the factory ever produced, sold at auction for $354,500, an auction record for any factory-made decoy at the time. That same duck later sold again in April of 2014 for $690,000. Not a one-of-a-kind carving, something that came off a production line in Detroit while cars were still a novelty. Here is the dark irony. 90% of antique decoys were repainted or had their heads broken off. Hunters used them hard. They were tools. The ones that survived in original condition, original point, no repairs, no restoration, are the ones that command the life-changing money, and those are exactly the ones most likely to look unremarkable to an untrained eye. Faded paint, a little dirt, no shine, no polish. Exactly the kind of thing someone cleaning out a relative's house would toss into a donation box without a second thought. Would you know the difference? Would anyone in your family? This April, in Lombard, Illinois, Guyette and Deeter held their spring auction. The centerpiece was the Jim and Diane Cook collection, assembled over more than 4 decades, widely considered one of the finest decoy collections ever put together. The auction house itself called it the Super Bowl of decoy collecting. Collectors flew in from across the country, and when the bidding opened on a Joseph Lincoln Wood Duck Drake with an extended crest, the numbers started climbing and did not stop. $1,250,000. The highest price ever paid for any decoy at auction, anywhere in the world. Minutes later, an Elmer Crowell preening widgeon, one of his rarest early poses, went for $1,140,000. 2 wooden ducks, over $2.3 million. In one afternoon, the broader sale totaled over $9 million across 635 lots. Let that number settle. $9 million for carved wooden birds that hunters once threw into the bottom of a boat. Here is what makes the Lincoln duck even stranger. Joseph Lincoln rarely carved wood ducks at all. The species had declined so badly by the early 1900s that Massachusetts banned hunting them entirely from 1906 through 1918. The federal government followed with a national ban from 1918 to 1951. Lincoln had almost no reason to carve them, yet he carved a handful. One of those 3 known surviving examples in original paint just became the most expensive decoy in history. The duck measured 15.5 inches long. It had never been rigged or weighted for hunting. Its original paint had mellowed into a rich patina over more than a century. It appeared in multiple landmark reference books on American folk art, and it had been in the Cook collection for over 40 years, before anyone outside that world ever had a chance to bid on it. Here's a question for you. When is the last time you really looked at the things on that high shelf? You have probably heard the phrase hidden in plain sight. But the real lesson here is not about objects. It is about attention. Elmer Crowell's decoys did not become more beautiful between 1900 and 2007. The wood is the same. The paint is the same. The craftsmanship is exactly what it was when he traded one for a bucket of clams. What changed is that someone decided to look, to really look, to see the artistry that had been sitting there for 100 years, ignored by thousands of people who walked past it without stopping. That is the money fail. Most people are trained to ignore things that look ordinary. A wooden duck on a shelf, a dusty box in the attic, an old tool in the garage. Our brains file these under junk and move on. We do not stop. We do not ask. We do not look closely. And so the value sits there, invisible, not because it is hidden, but because nobody is paying attention. Here is what serious collectors actually look for: originality. A decoy in original paint, never repainted, never restored, is worth dramatically more than one that looks polished and clean. Condition kills value when it means someone fixed it. The dirtier and untouched it looks, the more it may be worth. That is counterintuitive. That is also why treasure ends up in donation boxes. Maker marks matter too. Crowell stamped an oval brand on the underside of most of his later work. Mason Factory pieces sometimes have a grade stamp underneath. If you find a wooden bird and you see any mark on the bottom at all, stop cleaning it and start photographing it. Then contact a specialist auction house. Guyette and Deeter offers free decoy appraisals. So does Copley Fine Art Auctions. You send photos and they tell you what you have. That call costs you nothing. And consider the species: wood ducks, widgeons, curlews, shorebirds in unusual poses. The most common decoys are mallards and canvas backs. The rare species, the ones that were hard to carve or rarely hunted, are the ones that climb. A Lincoln wood duck was rare when it was made. Today there are 3 known examples in original paint. One of them just sold for over $1 million. The edge that separates people who find treasure from people who walk past it is not luck. It is the willingness to stop and ask one question. What is this, really? Money is not just in what you earn. It is in what you notice. Here is a question for you. Tonight, when you walk into your own garage or attic or basement, what are you going to look at differently? Is there something sitting on a shelf right now, something you have ignored for decades, that deserves a second look? Would you even know how to tell if it matters? Most decoys are worth $50 to $200. The ones that are worth 1,000 times, that are the untouched ones, the rare species, the maker-marked ones, the ones that look like nobody ever loved them. Be honest with yourself. Most people will not stop to look. But now you know what stopping looks like. Subscribe to Money Fails. Real stories, real mistakes, real lessons. Because the next time someone tells you it is just a dusty old wooden duck, you might want to get a second opinion. See you in the next one.